Good morning. All right, back to normal. The last couple of weeks we've had Christmas and we've had New Year and getting back into the swing of things, just a regular Sunday, but it's beautiful out there. The mountains are beautiful. And we have heat. Isn't that nice? So thanks for whoever did that. Olson? Okay, good job. All right, today we're continuing. This is lesson 6 on sacred gifts and holy gatherings. And today's lesson is the most beautiful bride, which may be a misrepresentative title. After studying it for a while, she is most beautiful, but she may not be a bride yet. She may turn down the guy who's after her and go after someone else. So this is part of 4 Weddings and Funeral. This is the second one, the most beautiful bride from Song of Solomon. Now when looking at this, I guess back in August, going through these, I don't know if you're familiar with these standard lesson commentaries. I got some good lessons here, and I went back and got all the way back to winter quarter of 2015 and 16. I said, oh, this is good. But I was scared of Song of Solomon. I'd never taught it. I've never heard anyone teach it. Hosea, I think I've heard it once in a sermon. That's about it. So I did Song of Solomon first because I said, if I can't do this, then forget it. So off and on, I've been working on this since September. So here we go. And by the way, Song of Solomon, Hosea, those are the books we read when we're reading through the Bible in a year. Which is basically what? It's a lot of box checking. Okay, Nahum done. What's next? Let's move on. You'll read Nahum on a Monday and forget all about it on a Friday, right? So, Song of Solomon. And I read it about 10 times in about 6 different versions, and I'm not sure I got the whole thing yet. It is a challenging, but it's a fun book. Okay, it's one of the only books, one of the few books that has 2 titles. Song of Solomon or Song of Songs are the 2 titles. And if we see here, the ESV has the Song of Songs, which is Solomon's. Now, Song of Songs we have there, that's how the NIV does it, the NLT, the LEB, and the NET. Song of Solomon is in the ESV, King James, New King James, NASB, and CSB. The numbers in parentheses there, just trivia. Those are their order in the most popular Bibles sold. So as of March 2022, last year, number 1 selling version is the NIV. Number 2 is the NLT, 3 is ESV, and King James used to be most popular. It's down to number 4. And after reading this, I have to say the NIV and the NLT were my favorite versions. ESV, least favorite versions. Because of they add commentary through their pericopes, which I don't agree with some of their pericope titles. But look what we have in common. Song. Now, to be authentic, I think I should be singing this to you in Hebrew.
Go ahead.
I wish I could. I wish I could be singing this to you, but it is a song. So what are the 2 things that songs have? Lyrics and the melody, the music. We don't have the music, and we have the lyrics, but they've been different language, and you lose stuff in translation. So I've heard, if you think the Psalms are beautiful in King James, it's nothing compared to reading them in Hebrew. So the title, we'll look at the title. It comes from the first 2 words of the first verse, Shir Hashirim, Song of Songs. And the second word there denotes a superlative. In other words, this of all the songs out there, this is the best song. And we see that in New Living Translation has, this is Solomon's Song of Songs, the most wonderful, more wonderful than any other song. Let's look at some of the praise for a Song of Songs in some of the works out there, some of the titles. This comes from this 2nd century rabbi, Akiba ben Joseph, who wrote about it. He said, all the ages are not worth the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies. Title, Song of Songs, compare it to Holy of Holies, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, Heaven of Heavens. It indicates the apex, the pinnacle, the best of what they had there. Means that this was the finest of all the songs in Scripture. Solomon, we're told in 1 Kings 4:32 that he wrote 1,005 songs, of which this one is the best. But this is the best of everyone's, not just Solomon's. So the best song in Scripture. The Targum, which is the Aramaic translation of the Hebrew, has this as its title. It says, Songs and Praises which Solomon the prophet, king of Israel, spoke by the spirit of prophecy before the Lord of the world, Yahweh. And then he says, 10 songs were uttered in this world. This song was the best of them all. And by these 10 songs, this includes the Song of Moses in Deuteronomy 32. It includes Deborah and Barak's song. It includes Hannah's song. So of all those songs, Song of Songs is the best. We go to the New Testament, Origen, one of the early church fathers, 3rd century, and he identified 7 songs in Scripture. And he would have added New Testaments, Mary's song, Zechariah's song, and he reasoned of all those that Song of Songs was still the best song. 2 interpretations. If you've ever studied Revelation, you may be familiar, they talk about the 4 different interpretations, futurist, premillennialist, millennialist, all those, and that there were 2 interpretations on this. And I didn't realize that. I had only heard of the first one. Here's the first one. It's the 2-character interpretation. We have a young shepherd girl. And 2, we have the king, Solomon, who is the woman's beloved. That is one interpretation. But there's another interpretation. Let me go through. This is the book here. And I had read it in several versions before I came across this. And it says Solomon's life included having 700 wives and 300 concubines. That's found in 1 Kings 11:3. The book of the Bible at issue today pictures his relationship or his attempted relationship with a singular woman, a shepherd girl. Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verse 8. The story behind the poetry seems to be that the king has fallen in love with his shepherdess and wants to bring her to his palace as a wife. But she pines for a boyfriend from her home village. So he's trying to take her away from her boyfriend. Does it work? So here's the 3-character interpretation. We have the young shepherd girl. And then we have a young local shepherd who is the young woman's beloved. They're both shepherds. They're both young. And then we have, here's the guy that's trying to take her away, win her away from this local shepherd, King Solomon, who tries to make the shepherd girl a part of his harem. Part of his harem. That's like taking a woman and locking her away in a convent. You'll never see her again.
It seems that Solomon, he's the guy, loved to collect things.
Yes.
Including people.
Women and horses. And gold. They said gold was so plentiful, silver was almost, trivial. Now, King Solomon loved many foreign women. This girl was not a foreign woman. She was local. Okay, here's the theme. This theme comes from the ESV Global Study Bible, and their theme is based upon the three-character interpretation. Song of Solomon contains beautiful poetry expressing romantic love between a young woman in ancient Israel. He is a shepherd, she is a shepherdess. They are looking forward to their marriage and the pleasure that it will bring. Going along with this three-character interpretation, I found it was here in the book, but then they didn't mention it anymore. So that was kind of curious. So I went and looked at other places. And sure enough, the three-character interpretation is in other places. And I think the person that had the best description of this three-character interpretation is Warren Wiersbe in his Wiersbe's Expository Outlines on the Old Testament. And I shall read this. He says, what we have here is a precious love story, a precious love song. It involves three characters. One, a lovely maiden. She's forced to work by her family in their vineyards. Chapter 1, verses 5 and 6, and chapter 2, verse 15. Then we have her beloved. Undoubtedly a neighbor lad who has won her heart, and he's also a shepherd. And then we have King Solomon, who is known for his attraction to beautiful women, 1 Kings 11:3. While on one of his trips, so you can just take this as sort of the gist of Song of Solomon. Gordon, when you teach in Hebrews, you mentioned the gist of Hebrews. Take this as the gist of Song of Solomon. Now, while Solomon was on one of his trips to examine his lands, Solomon meets the lovely maiden and takes her to his palace, a prospective, wife. But she can only think of her beloved back home. That's chapter 1, verse 1 to chapter 2, verse 7. She tells the women of the harem where he takes her, these are referred to as the daughters of Jerusalem in the book here. She tells them not to try to persuade her to forsake her true love and become part of the harem. In chapter 2, verse 8 to chapter 3, verse 5, she recalls her beloved and even has a dream about him. Solomon visits her, chapter 3, verse 6 to chapter 4, verse 16, to try and win her love, but she still cannot forget her beloved back home. Her beloved also sees her in a dream. He also has a dream about her, chapter 5, verse 1 to chapter 6, verse 3. Again, the king tries to win her, chapter 6, verse 4 to chapter 7, verse 9. So Solomon, the king here, is persistent, but the maiden still refuses, chapter 7, verse 10 to chapter 8, verse 3. She is not impressed with the king's wealth, spices, lands, or flattery. The things that impress the Queen of Sheba about Solomon do not impress this young woman. Finally, true love wins out, and the maiden is set free. She flees to her beloved, chapter 8, verse 14, 8:4 to 14, and she is restored to her family again. Now, the problem I had with the two-character interpretation, the young woman and the king, is that her beloved is a shepherd. Not was a shepherd, he is a shepherd who lives close by, and they arrange to meet each other. Now, Solomon is already a king, so what would he be doing as being a full-time shepherd? The second thing is when she's having her dream, and in her dream, her beloved comes to visit her, and she's in the town looking for him, and she asks the watchman of the town, can you tell me where my beloved is? I'm trying to look him, I find him, and she has to describe him. Well, if her beloved is Solomon, what's he doing hiding out in the city and nobody knows where he is? And then the third thing is when she's in part of the harem, the women of the harem ask her, so what's so special about your beloved that you're pining for him? You're here in the palace, but you're still wanting your beloved. Well, they wouldn't be asking that if her beloved was Solomon. And then the fourth thing, at the end of the book, she's back home with her family. So that sort of indicates that, it's not Solomon. She's back home with her family. She's back home with her beloved. Song of Solomon Is it a book for girls? This is from Douglas Sean O'Donnell, The Song of Solomon and Invitation to Intimacy. The book of Proverbs can be called a book for boys. The word son is used over 40 times in Proverbs, but the word daughter is never used in Proverbs. Is it because men have problems raising their sons, but women are perfectly capable of raising their daughters? That's it? Okay. Women don't need any help. All right. So the gist of Proverbs is, my son, stay away from that kind of girl. Don't marry this kind of girl, but marry and save yourself for the right kind of girl. That's the one in Proverbs 31:10 through 31. That's where he talks about the noble wife that you should be saving for yourself. And then that's how the book ends there, Proverbs 31:10, this noble woman. That's how it ends, quite intentionally, for Proverbs is a book for boys. The Song of Songs is a book for girls. And its message to girls is this: first, patience, then passion, or uncompromised purity now, and then unquenchable passion later. And then he says, I'll put it this way. In Proverbs, the young lad is told to take a cold shower. In the Song of Songs, the young lassie is told to take a cold shower. You like that, Gordon? Lads and lassies.
Yes, it reeks of 19th century wording.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I don't know the date on that, but young lassie, take a cold shower. That would have been good advice for Potiphar's wife, wouldn't it? Okay. Now this Proverbs 31:10 through 31, we tend to think of Solomon with Proverbs, but he didn't write that. Those are the words of King Lemuel. And where did he get those words? From Mama. So that's actually coming from King Lemuel's mama. Now, the woman, the beautiful woman, she's the dominant character in the book and speaks more often than the man. 53% to 34%. And then when he does speak, he only speaks to compliment her. One thing that's interesting about Song of Solomon, we have the intro verse, and then after that, everything in the book is dialogue. There's only if you look in your Bibles there are no quotation marks for speech, because everything in the book is speech. Like Job, after the introduction, we get Job and the three friends. Everything after that is dialogue till you get to the end. Both she and the man are young, probably just coming into maturity. She loves her beloved with her soul, if you remember the Shema, love the Lord with your heart, your soul, and your strength. But if you go later on into the book, which talks about love, it talks predominantly about the soul, the inner love. That's the inner being, love with your soul. So if you take this like 1 Corinthians 13, love with your heart, your soul, your strength, but the greatest of these is soul. Jonathan loved David with his soul. She's a shepherdess and a keeper of vineyards. Her family is making her do that, the vineyard part. The woman initiates the relationship, and she is the pursuer in the relationship. She is not shy. She frequently expresses her desire for the man and overcomes obstacles to be with him. They're both shepherds, and she wants to get the two flocks together at noontime, and they'll have a picnic there under the trees. She views herself modestly, even though she's so beautiful, but the man has high regard for her. He calls her the most beautiful of women. She is flawless, she is perfect, and she is pure. She's also called a Shulamite, perfect and pure and flawless. So does she exist? Or is she just a woman in song, the perfect woman? Yes. Yes.
It it appears that if this were to be made a performance, it would be made before a large group with responsive reading going through the entire book.
And in a later slide, we'll find out this actually is a performance in one of their feasts and festivals. She describes herself here. I am dark-skinned, but beautiful. O women of Jerusalem, she's describing herself. Dark as the tents of Kedar, dark as the curtains of Solomon's tents. Now don't stare at me because I'm dark. The sun has darkened my skin. She's not a refined woman of the palace, stays inside, go outside. She works. She keeps the vineyards. She is a shepherdess. She doesn't wear a veil outside. She's a worker. My brothers were angry with me. They first forced me to care for their vineyards. They should have been doing that. So I couldn't care for myself, my own vineyard. So she had to work so hard she couldn't take care of her personal appearance, her things she does to make herself more beautiful, but she's still beautiful. She had a tan. You know what I thought of when I saw it? Who does this one? Tall and tan and young and lovely.
Yeah.
The girl from Ipanema. The girl from Ipanema. But we don't know if she's tall. We don't know if this woman is tall. The woman's outer beauty. She's beautiful beyond words. Her beauty is compared to the lovely city of Tirzah. Tirzah was a city in Samaria, and the word Tirzah means beauty. She's as beautiful as beauty. She's as beautiful as Jerusalem. She's as majestic as an army billowing with banners. Think of a majestic army. They've just been victorious. They've got their armor. Everything is shiny. Everything is polished. There's the flags and everything. So that's how beautiful she is. She's majestic. Her neck, eyes, and nose are all beautiful. Think of Leah. All we got on her was her eyes. Her sandal feet are beautiful. Even the women of Jerusalem refer to her as a rare beauty. Chapter 5:9 and chapter 6:1. Her dark hair falls in waves. The sun glistens off her hair. Her teeth are white as freshly washed sheep. None of her teeth are missing. I examine her. Let me check your teeth. And, she's got white teeth. So, lovely woman. Her smile is flawless. Her lips are scarlet. And even though she has a tan, you can tell that her cheeks are rosy.
Better looking than Mona Lisa then.
Yes, she is really good looking. But what about her inner beauty? We have some women in the Bible that were beautiful on the outside and not so beautiful on the inside. I'm going to read from this again. Her inner beauty. The woman who is the object of the king's affection in today's lesson was a stunning beauty, to be sure. But what was it about her that drew his attention so dramatically and in such an obsessively focused way? Surely there were other women of great physical beauty among his household of wives and concubines, yet none seems to have excited his passions like this young woman. It is probably accurate to say that there is more to her than meets the eye. Many indications in this book strongly hint that this woman was as lovely in character as she was in her physical attributes. She was not a sophisticated courtesan. She was not a product of the royal court and the big city. She worked outside. She had that tan. She was a simple country girl, innocent and pure, and was not overwhelmed by the attentions of the king. While God had blessed her with physical attractiveness that turned the head of the king, she had not cheapened this with pettiness, arrogance, or pride. The book does not describe her spiritually, but a secure relationship with God would have contributed to her attractiveness. What do you think about the relationship with God that those 700 wives had? They didn't do him much good, did they, with leading him away into idolatry? The man. The woman finds him to be desirable, and she wants to be with him. He's a shepherd like she is. The man is called the woman's beloved 33 times in the book, but the term doesn't seem to be referring to a king. It's to her young beloved. Solomon is mentioned, but he does not seem to be the beloved of the man. He's sort of mentioned as a third party. Let's look at love in Song of Solomon. We see love in the Old Testament, New Testament, Psalms. Most mentions. Song of Solomon is down there toward the bottom here. And then look at New Testament, we have John and 1 John. We know all about love in 1 John. So Psalms, the most mentions, but how large is Psalms? 150 of them. How big is Song of Solomon? So let's put them together here and look at this based upon the size of the book. Mentions per thousand. Look at what we've got now. It's second only to 1 John. 1 John mentions per thousand words. 1 John is the winner, then Song of Solomon, then 2 John. Authorship. Traditionally thought to be Solomon, son of David and the king of Israel. He wrote 1,005 songs, 3,000 proverbs, and spoke about trees, hyssop, animals. And there's a lot of mention horticulture, a lot of thing about trees in this book. Different types of trees, apple tree, nut tree, plants, flowers in this book. Solomon has a role in 4 of the 5 books of poetry, Psalms, two of the Psalms, 72 and 127, of course Proverbs, of course Ecclesiastes, and then he is mentioned, if not the author, he is mentioned in Song of Solomon. So alternative renderings of the first verse is, this is from the Lexham English Bible, has Song of Songs, which is for Solomon. For Solomon, not by Solomon. The conjunction preceding Solomon can be translated in several ways. It's for Solomon. The book is dedicated to Solomon. That's what the LEB has. It's by Solomon, means it's written by Solomon. Solomon is the author. The book concerns Solomon. It's about him. And then for, it's Solomonic. It's in the style of Solomon, the literary tradition of Solomon. The book is not always complimentary to him, to Solomon, or the king in the book. And he seems to be bragging about his wealth and his harem. All the women there. This is from the Dictionary of the Old Testament Wisdom, Poetry, and Writings. The title of the work associates Song of Psalms with the name of Solomon and literally reads, the Song of Songs, which is to Solomon. But in the book, the institution of the harem is critiqued. This calls into question Solomon's reputation and casts him in a bad light. For example, in chapter 6, verses 8 through 10, unfavorably compares this bloated harem, the queens, the concubines, the virgins without number, with the singular charms of one unique young woman. Hers is an undiminished glory, celestial in proportions, outshining his many wives and his many concubines. Another example is near the close of the book, where the harem is a vineyard that has become a bureaucratic business, again unenviable to those enjoying the singular woman, where she takes care of her own vineyard. Solomon is not an active character anywhere in the book, but rather a foil against which the true characters, the young boy and the young girl, interact and pursue love. Thus, Solomon may not have personally penned any of the actual poems of Song of Songs. Surely he did not create the book to undermine his own interests or reputation. But in that vein, Solomon does not always compliment himself in Ecclesiastes. As he says, he tried everything under the sun and found it to be meaningless. So that last part, Ecclesiastes does not always paint Solomon in a good light. So, what do we know about Solomon? Can any of you name a wife? There is actually a wife named Naamah. And she is only mentioned in the fact that she's the mother of Rehoboam. And she's right here. And then we have Pharaoh's daughter. Pharaoh is unnamed. The daughter is unnamed. 700 wives. What did they have in common? Wives of royal birth. This woman was not of royal birth. Would she have become a wife? Did he have any wives that weren't of royal birth? But here's Naamah. Here's Rehoboam. Naamah, she is an Ammonite. She's mentioned as the mother of Rehoboam here. Interesting, in Matthew's genealogy, he mentions 4 women. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba. But she's not mentioned. And he doesn't even mention Bathsheba by name. The wife of Uriah. Why does he do that? She's been married before. Tamar's been married twice. Ruth had been married before. Rahab was a harlot. So, this woman didn't have anything bad going for her, but she's not named. And in the book here, Song of Solomon, the king only has 60 queens, 80 concubines, plus, and this gets people upset, you got 80 queens, 60 queens, 80 concubines, but hey, I'm not finished yet. There's plenty of virgins without number, and is this young lady one of these virgins? So if he does marry her, she becomes queen number 61, and then Solomon can go looking for queen number 62. And then Solomon, 2 daughters are mentioned. They're right here, and that's where they're mentioned. But they're only mentioned because they were the wives of these 2 men. And that's the reason they're mentioned. So, uncomfortable with the intimate language. Why is such an times intimate song included in Scripture? This must be old. How intimate is this in today's society? Barely get a PG rating.
Very tame.
Very tame. Very tame. PG, Leviticus, PG-13. Because of that, Jewish and Christian tradition have the book as allegorical, with the man and the woman either representing Yahweh and Israel or Jesus and the church. So they're uncomfortable with it, so we'll make it allegorical. Well, David and Bathsheba adultery. I'm uncomfortable with that, so let's make it allegorical. It didn't really happen. The adultery is really Israel adultery with the Lord. So that didn't really happen. They say, well, if you're going to make this allegorical, then there's other uncomfortable passages in the Bible that you can make allegorical. The Jewish interpretation is that the man represents God, the woman represents Israel. So it's not about what it seems to be on the surface. It's really an allegory. Christian interpretation has the man being Christ and the church being the bride. Anybody have problems with King Solomon being a type of Christ?
That's a stretch.
Yeah. How many wives did Christ have? Yeah. How many?
His church.
Yeah, he had 1. So if Solomon is a type of Christ, why did Jesus and the apostles walk around? Why didn't they ride horses?
Yeah. Does not Scripture say that there is one greater than Solomon who is here?
Yes.
Christ.
So we have here Jesus and the bride. We have the passage here from Revelation 21, that talks about, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. So possibly there, that's an interpretation. So, let's move on. So placement, let's look where it is. We know where it is in our canon here. In the Hebrew canon, though, it's in a different spot. Song of Songs is the fourth book in the third section of the Hebrew Bible, the Ketubim. In the English canon, it follows Ecclesiastes. In the Hebrew, it comes before Ecclesiastes. That's interesting for this point. In the Hebrew Bible, we have the interesting and surely intentional order of Proverbs, Ruth, and then Song of Songs. Proverbs, as I said, concludes that with the noble wife, Psalm 31:10-13, and then it follows Ruth and then Song of Songs. Ruth and Song of Songs both represent virtuous and assertive women for our contemplation. Ruth, she virtuous? Yes. Was she assertive? Did she do what Naomi wanted her to do? Go back home? Was it a little assertive when she goes to the threshing floor and lies down next to Boaz and covers herself with his blanket?
She had a blanket.
Yes, she did what, she wasn't shy there, was she? But she did it because Naomi told her what to do. So essentially, Ruth proposed to Boaz. And in our book, Song of Songs, the woman here is assertive and virtuous. The megalith, those are the 5 scrolls. We talked about the performance. The 5 books of the Hebrew Bible read in synagogues on 5 of the annual holidays. Ecclesiastes is read during the Feast of Booths. Those were the last of the 3 celebrations. Esther was read during Purim. The Song of Solomon read or performed during Passover. Ruth was read during Pentecost. And Lamentations was read during Lamentations, or lamenting, crying. That was read during the 9th of Ab. That was the mourning for the destruction of the temple. These books appear together in the 3rd division in the Hebrew canon in this order: Ruth. Okay, so proceeded. So we got Ruth. Proverbs, and then we have Ruth, Song of Solomon, Ecclesiastes, Lamentations, and Esther. So 3 of these 5 have women as the central characters. Now the characters described, if you check in your Bible here, there'll be a footnote there, and they have like she and he. You have that in the ESV, and then there will be a footnote there. And where these come from is the gender and the number on the pronouns. So it lets you know who is speaking. Is the person male? Is the person female? Or is it singular or plural? The plural would be the chorus, the women of Jerusalem speaking. So we have she, he, bride, bridegroom, beloved. And we don't have Solomon on any of those. But the ESV does put Solomon in there for a pericope title. So unless you have those, it might be difficult to tell who is speaking. And you notice a version that's missing there? King James does not have that. I said I read it in different versions, and then 3rd or 4th one I read was King James. And I said, I'm glad I read the other ones first, because now I know who's speaking. You don't know who's speaking in the King James. Is it the man or the woman? So, who or what is the Rose of Sharon? Came upon that in Song of Songs. It's found in Song of Songs. It's found in no other book of the Bible. Lily of the Valley. It's found in no other book of the valley. We have it in our songs. Jesus, Rose of Sharon. I have found a friend in Jesus. He's the lily of the valley. So is Jesus the Rose of Sharon? So here's that passage. This is Song of Solomon 1:16 through 2:2. It gives the speaker here. The woman speaks, and then the man. She says, "Behold, you are beautiful, my beloved, truly delightful. Our couch is green, the beams of our house are cedar, our rafters of pine. I am a rose of Sharon. a lily of the valleys. And then he speaks up. He says, as a lily among the brambles, so is my love among the young women. Well, she's talking here about when they're shepherds. Our couch is green, where you lie down. They're lying down out in the pastures. It's lunchtime, the sheep are out grazing, they're together. Our couch is green, the pastures. The beams of our house, overhead they got the trees. So they're resting there in the shade, the sheep are out there. And then she says, I'm a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. And then he says, as a lily of the brambles. So what we have here is like when Jesus says, when you're going to a feast or something like that, don't sit in the top place. Move down, and then the host will bring you up. So she is complimenting him. You are beautiful, my beloved, truly delightful. So she is exalting her lover, and she is humbling herself. I'm just a rose of Sharon, a lily of the valleys. So she's complimented him, she's humbled herself with the hopes that he will then bring her up. He said, no, you're not. As a lily among the thorns. If you're a lily among the brambles. So he brings her up, which is what she wanted. So, who is the rose of Sharon? The woman. And if the woman represents the church, is the church the rose of Sharon? The lily of the valleys? Plus, rose and lily, in Hebrew, they're both feminine gender. Even today, rose, lily, women's names. Here's the King James. Behold, thou art fair, my beloved, you are pleasant. Now, I looked the dates on that. Found a friend in Jesus, 1871. Jesus, Rose of Sharon, 1922. So the authors of these songs would have had just the King James. And perhaps that's why they attributed Rose of Sharon and Lily of the Valleys to Jesus rather than attributing that to his bride, the church. So was it actually a rose? Roses were not indigenous to the area at this time. These are the other NLT, a spring crocus. Net has a meadow flower. I'm just a meadow flower. I'm a narcissus. I'm a flower of the plain. And then Rose of Sharon, LEB, but then it has the footnote in that the maiden compares herself to just a flower of the meadow. Nothing special. She's just a flower of the meadow. And then he exalts her and he says, well, you're a flower among weeds, like that. So there's the coastal plain, and then the meadow there, the coast Sharon is right in there. So that's where that flower would have been. So New Testament allusions in song. There's no quotes, but here's some allusions. Song of Solomon had a vineyard at Baal Hamon. He let out the vineyard to its keepers. Reminds you a little bit of a man planted a vineyard and let it out to tenants. Yep. And a second one here, this is from Ephesians. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. So this is Christ describing the church in Ephesians. And then here we have the man describing the woman in song. He says, you are altogether beautiful, my love. There is no flaw in you. So no spot, no blemish, no wrinkle. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one of her mother, pure to the one who bore her. So there's a couple of allusions there. So let's finish here with, was that the second bell?
First.
Okay. It says, this is the king here speaking. He says, you are beautiful as tears of my love, lovely as Jerusalem, awesome as an army with banners. So that must be the second bell. He says, turn away your eyes from me, for they overwhelm me. So he's overwhelmed Your hair is like a flock of goats leaping from the slopes of Gilead. Your teeth are like flock of ewes, female sheep that come down from washing. All of them bear twins. Not one among them has lost its young. Your cheeks are like pomegranates. And then we have the verse here, 8. It says, there are 60 queens and 80 concubines and virgins without number. This seems to be out of place because he's talking about her. But then we get to my dove, my perfect one, is the only one. So even though there's 60 queens, 80 concubines, virgins without number, even though that, you are the only one to me. So he's really complimenting her. My dove, my perfect one, is the only one of her mother, pure to one who bore her. The young women saw her and called her blessed. The queens and the concubines also praised her. Who is this who is like a dawn, beautiful as the moon, bright as the sun, awesome as an army with banners? Okay, I think that is it. Okay, this is it then. I went down to the nut orchard to look at the blossoms of the valley, to see whether the vines had budded, whether the pomegranates were in bloom. Before I was aware, my desire set me among the chariots of my kinsmen, a prince. So she calls her beloved a prince now. Perhaps the greatest lesson of this is the last. This really is the last slide. Perhaps the greatest lesson in the Song of Solomon is the deepening communion that ought to exist between those who love each other. No matter where Solomon took the young maiden, her heart was always with her beloved. She spoke of him, she dreamed of him, and when she was free, she rushed home to be with him. That's in the last chapter. Do we have this kind of love for Christ? Do we see his beauty? Do we realize how much he loves us and longs to have fellowship with us? Next week, Hosea and Gomer. Jim Neighbors. Right? All right.
Great class.
Thank you.